In this video, we're going to show you how to replace the exhaust manifold on your Ford Focus. This will be located behind the motor. Let's get started. Open the fuse box in the engine bay. We're going to remove the fuel pump relay. Remove the relay. If you use a pair of pliers, be very careful not to break the relay. With the relay out, go into the car, start the car, and let it die out. It should stall out after about a minute. Put the relay off to the side. Remove the heat shield for the EGR. Pop the pins out. Pull the shield out. We're going to start to remove the lines for the EGR valve. Pull this lock down. Pop it out. Push down on the connector and then push back. It's a good idea to have a rag when you do this. Fuel may come out. Release the connector for the EGR. Push on the tab, pull straight back, remove the connector. Remove this connector, push on the white tab, pull back. Remove the hose. Just going to pull these to the side. There's one more on the bottom. Pull the hose out of the clips. Pull the line assembly out. Remove the harness clips off of the bracket. Using a 7mm socket, remove the 2 bolts holding in the EGR bracket. Remove the 2 bolts and remove the bracket. Remove the hose off of the valve cover. On the bottom there's a little tab. Push on that tab and remove the hose. This is our little tab. Spin the hose off to the side. Using a 13mm, remove the bolt for the eye hook. Using a 15mm socket, remove the 3 nuts on top of the exhaust manifold. Down on the driver's side, we're going to find our O2 sensors. We're going to undo these connectors, push on the tab, and then pull the connector out. Do the same thing on the other one. Remove the 2 connectors. Pull the plastic stay off of the bracket. Remove the O2 sensor plug on the passenger side. This will be on the top of the valve cover. There's a plastic stay on the back side. Remove the plastic stay. Pinch the hose clamp and slide it back. Remove the hose, pull it to the side. Using a 15mm socket, remove the nuts going from the exhaust manifold to the flex pipe. Remove the nuts, remove the washers. Remove the two 10mm bolts for the bracket. Remove the bolts. Using a 13mm socket, we're going to remove the two bolts out of the bracket. This is the bracket that's at the bottom of the exhaust manifold. Remove the bolt. Remove the bracket. Using a 15mm socket, remove the three nuts on the bottom of the manifold. Remove the nut and the stud. Pull the flex pipe out of the exhaust manifold. We're going to remove the exhaust manifold. If you're using a pry bar to get the exhaust manifold out, avoid prying on this face area. Try the best you can to leverage off of these ears, pushing back. Remove the exhaust manifold. Remove the gasket. Using a razor blade, go around and clean the mating surface for the exhaust manifold gasket. We don't want to take any material off, we just want to take off any of the corrosion. Using a clean rag with a bit of parts cleaner on it, we're just going to wipe down the surface. Install the gasket. Using a 7mm socket, remove the heat shield bolts. Remove the two bolts at the bottom of the manifold for the shield. We're only going to remove the one. This other one is broken. Remove the heat shield. Using a 10mm socket, remove the bolt to the bracket. Using a 22mm socket, we're going to remove the O2 sensors out of the old manifold. Remove the gasket. Using a flat blade screwdriver, getting under the gasket and popping it up. Using a wire wheel, go around and clean the flange and where the gasket will sit. Install the circle gasket into the manifold. Install the O2 sensors into the manifold. We're going to get them all started and then go back and torque them all down. Torque the O2 sensors to 35 foot-pounds. If you can't get a torque wrench on them, do the best you can. Install the brackets under the exhaust manifold. On one side I'm going to be installing a bolt and a nut. One of ours broke. Do this on both sides. We're going to snug our bolts down. We don't want to make them tight. We still want to be able to move this collar. Just like that. Install the heat shield. Be sure that the O2 harness is going through it. Get the top bolts lined up and started. We're going to twist. get it to line up. Snug down the bracket bolts. Get them nice and snug. Using a wire wheel or a whizzer wheel, we're going to clean the flex pipe flange. Install the manifold into the car. Install the manifold, get it seated onto the studs. If any of your studs came out with the nuts, use a wire wheel and clean above and below. Heat up the nut and then remove it. You can use a socket and then an E8 to hold the head of the bolt and thread the nut up and off. Do this for any studs that came off as a pair. Install the studs into the manifold. Get these started by hand, and then I'm going to use a stud installer to install them. You can either use a stud installer or an E8 socket to install your studs. Get them nice and snug. Install the nuts onto the studs. Moving on to the bottom side of the manifold, we're going to install the studs and the nuts. Because of limited space, I'm not able to get a socket or a stud installer onto the back of this stud. I'm using two nuts tightened down together on the stud, and then going to use a wrench to install the stud. Get the stud nice and snug. Loosen the nuts and remove them from the stud. Install the nuts onto the studs. Go through and snug down all of the nuts for the exhaust manifold. Get them touching the manifold, but don't make them tight. We're going to torque them right after we get them all snug. Snugged all the nuts on the bottom. Get all of the bottom manifold bolts bottomed out onto the manifold. Don't tighten them yet. We're going to do that in the next step. Snug down all the top nuts, get them bottomed out onto the manifold. Don't forget the one down on the driver's side. Torque the manifold nuts to 41 foot-pounds. Follow the pattern we go in. This is number 1. This is number 2. Number 3. This is stud number 4. Number 5. This is number 6. Stud number 7. Install the bracket into the vehicle. Get the bolt started. Leave these slightly loose all the way until the end of the job. Make sure you still have a little bit of play in the bracket. Using a 10mm socket, we're going to slightly loosen the bracket bolts around the catalytic converter. Just enough that it's able to be moved. You may have to do this on both sides. Get the bracket lined up with the top bracket and then install the bolts. Just get them started. These should be 10mm. Since one of our bolts broke, we had to swap it to a 12. Snug down the bracket bolts. Torque these to 35 foot-pounds. If you can't get a torque wrench in there, do the best you can. Torque the converter bracket to engine bracket bolts to 35 foot-pounds. Snug down the bolts for the converter bracket. Get them nice and snug. Do the same thing on the other side. We're going to install the flex pipe onto the manifold. Be sure that your gasket is still seated into the manifold. Get the flex pipe installed. Install the washers onto the studs. Get the nut started. Snug the bolts down. Torque the nuts to 33 foot-pounds. If you can't get a torque wrench on it, do the best you can. Install the hose. Get it fully seated on the pipe. Pinch the clamp, pull it back to its original position. Install the purge valve bracket. Get the screws started on either side. Snug the screws down. Install the pipe into the clips. Push straight down, you'll hear it click into place. And install the line on the bottom. Push until you hear it click. Give it a pull back, make sure it's locked on. Pull the lines over. Install this line, give it a pull, make sure it's locked on. Install the fuel line. Push until you hear it click, give it a pull, make sure it's locked. We're going to install the lock around it. This tab slides into the clip, and then you pull up, and it'll click onto the line. Install the connector. Push until you hear it click, give it a pull, make sure it's locked on. Install the plastic stays into the bracket. Install the heat shield. Push the clips into place. Install the O2 sensor connector. Push until you hear a click. If you don't, give it a pull back. Install the line to the valve cover. Push until you hear a click. If you don't, pull back, make sure it's locked on. Install the O2 sensor connectors. Install the plastic stay into the bracket. Install the engine hook and bolt. Get the bolt started by hand. Torque the bolt to 35 foot-pounds. If you can't get a torque wrench on it, do the best you can. Install the relay. Close the box, and you're all set.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.